in 2022. Oh, actually, the first thing that I'm going to do, I wanted to let you guys know that we're pulling item number 6 from the agenda because no legal counsel is available today, and it's not really preferred to enter into closed session without counsel available. So number 6 is coming off the agenda. All right, so let's go on to number 1, which is the approval of the minutes from 6/7/2022. Does anybody have a motion to approve? Alder Lucas moves to approve. Second. Alder Henke. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Let's go to number 2, discussion and possible action on deed restrictions on 180 East Wausau Ave. Randy?
Thank you, Chair. So you'll remember at your last meeting, we talked about the RFP that went out for 180 East Wausau Ave. We have that one proposal between the Economic Development Committee and the City Council. They accepted that proposal and moved forward with negotiations. As part of that, we went through and what we decided to utilize were deed restrictions for that property. That way we're encapsulating what they're proposing as something that actually become fruition. So what you see in your packet is what we've put together. Probably the most important thing is just item number 1, which talks about giving them 1 year to reach occupancy from the time of transfer of the property. So they'll have 1 year. Fully expect it'll take less time than that. But given supply chain issues, everything else that's happening in the world today, it seems like a reasonable amount of time for them to complete that. There are some specific structural issues that they're going to deal with the building, mainly probably the roof. There's also heating, electric, air conditioning things. Those are included as improvements that when completed, if there's part of it, for whatever reason, it would come back to the city that they would get reimbursed for those costs. And the reason we did it that way is that that's beneficial for any user down the road. Or anything above and beyond that where it may not be beneficial to another use, we didn't want to include that as part of those costs. So happy to take any questions.
So any questions about this item? Okay, so is there a motion to approve the deed restrictions and move forward with the sale?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, Alder Rasmussen. Second.
I'll second.
Alder Lukens. Any other final discussion before we vote? All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so item number 3 was an added agenda item, discussion and possible action on the 5th Amendment to the Entrepreneurial and Education Center Development Agreement.
So this is a newer item that came up just recently. I've been trying to get more comfortable in my role and working with the Education Entrepreneurial Center. We've got several new people in new roles there. Most people remember Romy Wagner was the managing director there for some time. He stepped back into more of a maintenance role. They've hired or contracted with McDevco now to provide for a lot of their administrative services. So kind of with having a bunch of new people in new roles, we've been working through the different agreements. At this point, there's a development agreement and 4 amendments between the city and the EEC. And there's multiple agreements between McDevco and the EEC and Romy Wagner's management company. As part of all of that, going through it, we kind of went through and worked through the different duties. And just being that there's been different people in different roles, and as time's gone on, different things have changed. And what we did was we sat down and broke down everybody's different duties. One of the things that came up as a city duty and one of the most recent amendments dealt with maintaining and bidding services or procurement services. In my time, that's not something I was working on, so it's something we talked about. And that was not their intent to have the city take on that. They're going to continue in that role, so we wanted to make sure that that was in the agreement so that there wasn't any confusion down the road. And that's why we're bringing this amendment forward.
All right, any questions? Alder Rasmussen.
So the amendment then strikes our obligation to provide that service?
That is correct.
Okay, then I'll move to approve the 5th Amendment.
All right, a second? Alder Henke. Any other discussion or questions? Yeah, Alder Killian.
Yes, in the future, I'd like to see the other services brought back for discussion and possible action when this contract is up for reconsideration. In the last term, there was some concern about services we were providing beyond this amendment with procurement, and I agreed with that commentary, so I think in the future that would be beneficial. Thank you.
And maybe that can be something that is more of an educational presentation when we go and do the tour, right?
Yeah, we had talked about kind of just how this came up and trying to get some education for some of the newer members to the council is having an actual tour at the facility and being able to ask and see some of that stuff in person. In terms of reoccurring contracts on this, I don't know that anything necessarily, and if it does, it's in large year increments, like 50-year increments for contracts on this. So if there was a change, it wouldn't be something that would come up at renewal unless we're planning on being here for a really long time. So that'd be something we could talk about. But really, at this point, it's snow removal, lawn mowing, weed control, accounting, and accounts payable and receivable are the big things the city provides. I come and attend the meetings. Chair Watson attends the meetings as a voting member. And kind of in my role as economic development, I kind of want to be there and talking with some of the different tenants as well as some of the opportunities that they may see going forward in the city.
Thank you. And in that case, I don't know, with my cholesterol levels, I may not be here in 50 years. So perhaps that's worthy of, if it can be requested for an agenda item in the future, much like this amendment, whether all my colleagues would agree with my position or not. That's been a long-standing concern, and prior to that concern were concerns about kind of the incestuous nature of the use of TIF requests when Mr. Wagner was on the council and was making those requests for the entrepreneurial center. So yes, I'd like to see perhaps another amendment moving forward to revisit these services. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right, so I think we have a motion on the floor with a second. So all those in favor of approving the Fifth Amendment to that EEC development agreement, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, it passes. Number 4 is amended, so it's to schedule a committee tour of the EEC. Director Burdick?
Sure. So Kim Weber is the executive director of McDevco, and as Randy just explained, they are the managing entity essentially right now of the EEC. She was on vacation, unfortunately, good for her, but for us being able to schedule, we have not gotten dates yet. And so what I will do is send an email to a doodle poll to the committee to find some dates that we can tour the center. We had this agenda item, I should back up, maybe came to us as a request to just understand better the role between the city and the EEC. And as we were talking about how to do that, we kind of thought that the tour would be a really great opportunity to bring everybody on site, see exactly what they do firsthand, and be able to kind of have a more conversational question and answer about how everything works. And you can then you all will be more informed ambassadors of that service as well to our community. So we will get back to you, I imagine later this week when I have dates from Kim about when we can do that. So that's forthcoming.
And I would have to say, maybe try to include some middle of the day ones, because there's an awesome restaurant out there I had no knowledge of before I attended the meeting. So it was sort of my ask to put it on there, because I thought it was sort of a thing that we didn't really know much about. So I hope you guys can appreciate that and we have some time. So number 5 is an educational presentation on use of requests for proposals and the use of real estate agents for disposition of city property. Director Burdick?
Sure. So this was an item that had actually come to us from a couple different requests or questions that we've received from alders and from just citizens. So as I was talking to Chair Watson about how to put the agenda together, she suggested doing an educational presentation on this. So, and then in kind of formatting that, I understand that this was, some of the components of this were talked about at the retreat, and so the mayor was kind enough to send just a couple bullet points of what we should make sure to address. So we attempted to do that in this memo. So from the outset, I just want to say thank you very much for the questions, because this is a good opportunity. It's always a good opportunity to kind of re-examine what we are doing and make sure that we continue to follow best practices throughout the state and make sure that, we're getting the most effective work done for the city. So helps us to sharpen and reevaluate, so I appreciate it. So anyway, as I mentioned, tried to address some of the questions that came in the retreat. And our department really lives this. So if we kind of got into the weeds too deep or too fast and we missed something, that's what we want to be able to have, questions and answers from you guys today. So basically, the memo lays out a lot of what I'm going to just briefly touch on, but, it kind of starts with why does the city acquire property in the first place? And either it's strategic or challenging are kind of the two main items that it comes down to. So strategic can be for the location, for an architectural or historic significance. Challenging can be again, location, it can be, again, historic or architectural, or it can be something to do with land. Like, for instance, we own some property right now in floodplains, or with, the riverfront's a good example as well, where it requires some cleanup, and the city is the entity that has the ability to really move that forward, or we're going to be asked for participation anyway, so it makes more sense for us to own the land and have some control and transparency over that vision. As I mentioned, there are a couple different instances. Sometimes we acquire a property with a vision. Sometimes we just know it's strategic and we want to make sure that whatever goes there fits the general tapestry for the community. I gave a couple examples of what both of those look like. It comes down to, like I said, a lot of basically, what do we want this area to look like, or what does the city need in that particular area? You'll see, again, examples of Wausau Club, West Side Battery, and most recently 180 East Wausau. We often do an RFP process for commercial properties, and sometimes it has to do with zoning as well. For instance, 180 East Wausau is a good example where we bought it. It's zoned light industrial, but the redevelopment vision for that area does not really contemplate a light industrial use there, so we preemptively rezoned it to urban mixed use so that we could kind of pursue the entertainment concept that we wanted in that area that will fit with the eventual redevelopment there. Like I said, eventually, or in general, the city uses RFP processes for transparency, fairness, and planning ability. I think it kind of, I tried to talk through some of the pros and cons of these different processes through this memo. One of the things that I'll call out is, like, for instance, if we were to use a real estate professional, and there's difference between agents and brokers, but if we were to use more of a private entity like that, we have to RFP that process anyway, as long as it falls within the procurement policy, which kind of depends on the value of the property that we're looking to dispossess ourselves of. So that can add another month or more to the process of selling a property. And then that also is more of a first come, first served basis. So a real estate agent would bring us or broker would bring us a potentially interested party. It might go through committee and council before we, if we choose to say no to that person or that entity, we would be coming back and doing that again. An RFP process, in contrast, is advertised to the community via the paper of record, and we send it out to our contacts, to our development contacts, whether they be residential, commercial, mixed use, whoever we're trying to get there, and then we're able to gather all of those on one time frame and evaluate everyone at one time. We also, in an RFP process, are able to create our own scoring criteria. And I did include examples of a couple prior RFPs, one for West Side Battery and one for 180 East Wausau, so that you could look at the different scoring criteria that we use. They aren't uniform. We do include a lot of the same criteria in every RFP, and that does speak to both the quantitative and qualitative basically criteria that we're looking at. And I know that was those were some of the points that were talked about in the retreat of the quantitative ROI in terms of the tax bill, development value, number of jobs, and the quantitative information in terms of community need, quality of life, blight remediation, and community engagement around a project. So, for instance, the quantitative ROI that we look at in a scoring criteria of an RFP can be found in both of these, where we talk about the value, the reasonable purchase price to the city, the taxable value, and then we also look at, this more qualitative information in terms of how does it go with the rest of the land and the projects around there? Does it meet strategic goals, which were, those were, I think, conducted by the Chamber of Commerce or Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership. We don't have our strategic plan for the city ready to go yet to incorporate those, but so in lieu of that, and time being, we're using those the strategic goals of innovative companies, talented workforce, and/or placemaking. And then, for 180 East Wausau, you can also see that we included a scoring criteria that it meets athletic park parking needs, because that is part of a development agreement that we have with the athletic park that we need to make sure to accommodate in the use of this space. So we take those different things into account. That's part of when it comes to the committee, to this committee, when we issue the RFP, all of that is up for debate. So if you see something that, you are questioning why we included something, or you want to see something else in there, we are more than welcome, it's more than welcome to have those discussions and to then adjust the scoring criteria appropriately. And you can also see I included the last competitive bidding process we had was for West Side Battery, response to the RFP for that. And we had different point allotments for the different criteria and an explanation of those criteria. So I guess I will stop there and then see what questions you have that I can answer for you. And I also wanted to thank Randy for his collaboration on this. So if there's something that I missed, Randy, you can always come up and fill in.
All right, committee, do you have any questions, comments? I'll do Rasmussen.
I have one. It has always seemed to me that often with an RFP, that does allow us, at least locally and as a committee, a greater level of control of what a site becomes. And, it does allow us to kind of articulate our vision and then solicit other people's vision to see where those two things meet. And, yet other times we've used a real estate broker when we've had remnant parcels that we maybe needed to dispose of that were of larger size. And we didn't have an immediate project and there was no, necessarily articulated land use. So, depending on the situation there. But, when I looked at, in the memo, we had talked about our RFP being sent to the Wausau Daily Herald, which is the newspaper of record, or the official city paper. And to become the official city paper, you have to meet certain criteria and whatnot as far as the frequency of your publication and whatnot. But I guess, that's all evolving. Like the way people get their news, the way they get their information is evolving. So there's no law that says that we can only submit it to the newspaper of record. I would like to see us get to a state where when we issue an RFP, that not only does it exist on our website, but that we circulate that to all media outlets, maybe perhaps through a standard press release, because I would be very happy to see a news story on television where, one of those two channels tells somebody that we're accepting proposals. Or I would like to see that in the online news and maybe hear it on the radio. But, I think that if we don't release that information to multiple outlets, they may never get it, and then they won't create a story out of it. So, and I think in the interest of giving people information the way they want to receive it, that may be also true of our development community, because there were times that we would release stuff in the paper, but then we would go to certain specific development publications, like certain magazines or certain geographic areas, depending on what we were looking for. And I guess I would just like to see a little wider net with the information getting out, because there may be people locally that have ideas that wouldn't get it if they're not subscribing to the one paper. So, or following the website like incessantly. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, that got me thinking on one of the things every time we talk about how we dispose of properties and in past lives, different jobs, we have gone the real estate route where we hire a broker, we've done the RFP process. The downfall that I always seem to run into when we were working through a realtor is that we would get a proposal in front of a committee like yourselves or in front of the council, and it'd be like, oh, well, this is a great proposal. I wonder what else is out there. And then we would go through the RFP process that same way. To your point, the process for an RFP is great because it opens it up to anybody and everybody that wants to submit. But we've got to make sure that people are aware that the RFP is out there and we're taking in these submissions. For example, for the RFP for River Life, I think we emailed 50 different developers around the area. We went through the Wausau Daily Herald. But the most important thing is trying to find a way that we get in front of everybody that would be interested in the project. I think the RFP process gives us that opportunity in a larger sense. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Alder Killian?
Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I'd echo those sentiments from Alder Rasmussen and ED staff. You know, the more variety we can get those RFPs out there and in front of more eyes, the better. I would like to touch on, though, a comment that was made about RFPs and the ability to kind of quote-unquote control some of the planning of the city, you know. So sitting in this room for many years, even prior to being on the council, it became clear that really there were two assertions one would hear in the room, depending on which one was convenient at that particular moment. And one was, you know, things like this provide control, and it allows the city to control planning and execution more. But, you know, on certain evenings in meetings where that wasn't convenient, the argument would be, well, the private sector knows best, so who are we to question that, and who are we to get into planning of minutia? Now, I'm not debating which one or the other is necessarily correct, although I would say I don't think it's, you know, the government's role in Wausau or the U.S. to be the central planning committee, so to speak, for the private sector. But I do think moving forward, we could be much more consistent with our position and sentiment on that matter. So either the city is asserting itself in a way which provides more control, or you know, the private sector is the alternative, the masters of the universe. Who knows? But there needs to be more consistency, because I think on this body and in the audience, if you're the public, you know, it's noted that those have conflicted over time. So I think we could probably do better by being more consistent on that front, at least in messaging. Thank you.
Any other, Alder Rasmussen?
Yep, just one. I agree with that sentiment. I think that there's been times absolutely where it's been both. You know, and I think depending on what the project is and what the issues are, you know, surrounding the site or surrounding a specific project, you know, there are some times where you want to let the private sector's process play out to the greatest extent. And, you know, sometimes what happens is between them and their bankers, and we're not necessarily a part of that discussion, but I think there's other times, and I think maybe it's helpful if we substitute the word control for vision, because I think there's sometimes where you just want to like frame what your vision for a section of an area is, like if it's your medical campus or if it's your entertainment sector or whatever it is, so that people understand what our strategic plan or what our comprehensive plan lays out for certain areas of the city, you know, both from a zoning and a planning standpoint. Not that you necessarily need to control every aspect of every proposal or development, but, you know, I think if we know that we don't want a factory on a site, or, you know, that a certain area is not suitable for that use, then it's not. And I think it's helpful if people know that on the front end. And, you know, I think that's where sometimes it gets confusing, because depending on what the site is and what its history is and, you know, what the vision looks like, and sometimes those plans change, then, you know, sometimes that can look like both of those things. So I think that if we have greater flexibility with the RFP process, not that we want to dictate constantly, but I think if we want to spell out kind of the skeleton of what we want to see for certain areas, that's a way more useful tool. The other thing I always wondered about is if we are going to use a real estate broker or an agent, obviously we then are going to pay that person to sell the property, and they're going to then receive a commission based on the selling price, versus us selling it ourselves, or, you know, working that into a proposal or into a development agreement. We basically are losing the money that we've paid the realtor. And, you know, whether that's a negotiated amount or if it's, you know, 7 or 10% or whatever, it can be big bucks if we didn't necessarily need that guidance from that professional. So just my 2 cents.
Awesome. Any other questions? Alder Yankee?
So I haven't been part of a competitive RFP yet, but who decides the points? Does that come to the committee and then we debate Like, okay, this is actually 20 points, not 25 points?
So our last one that came to the committee was for 180 East Wausau, and staff, we draft the point criteria, the criteria and the point allocations, and make sure that it adds up to 100 and everything like that. But then it's completely up, up for debate. We copy and paste from a lot of the last RFPs because, like I said, some of the stuff remains consistent in terms of taxable value, reasonable sale price. We always want to make sure that there's, or give award price points for green building criteria and things like that. But ultimately, it's up to the committee.
Yeah, I think Alder Henke, to answer that question in terms of the scoring, the way I'd envision is if we had multiple different proposals that we would present them to you, probably then give you some time to score them on your own, and then probably come back and probably discuss them. I don't know if it would be open or closed session, and go through that process, so.
Thank you, which might be a little bit of a departure, because my understanding was that the staff development team was doing the scoring and not the committee. So, in the past, we've kind of helped articulate the criteria. When the criteria they've set made sense, we've not adjusted that, but sometimes we've given, extra points for job creation, or we've given extra points for local contractors or locally sourced material. But ultimately, I think the development team was doing the scoring internally and not us in the committee. Because I think that our goal has been to remove some of the politics from it before it even gets here. And that's how, we've seen in the past some projects that were just not a fit end up on the cutting room floor, and we don't have to get to that point in the committee with those projects, because some are just either they want way too much, or the project is completely not a fit. Not that those come along every day, but they have before. If something comes along and it wants 50% participation, people know what our answer is going to be. Right. So, but the scoring was a staff function.
Okay, and that's good to know. I've seen it done both ways in different places, so when we get to our next RFP, that'll be something good to have a discussion about in that process as we're creating the criteria and the proposal before it goes out.
Yeah.
We can be as involved or as uninvolved as you would like us to be in this process.
Any additional questions? Comments? All right, I don't think we need to take action on that.
No.
So we're jumping to number 7, adjournment. Do I have a motion? You guys want to stay? Okay. A second by Alder Killian. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
I guess. That would be way too much. I can't vote to adjourn.